and welcome. Today, we move on to the next webinar in our series for REACH 2018 registrants, Completeness Check, Preparing a Registration Dossier, and the Most Common Failures. In this webinar, we will guide you through the types of manual checks performed by ECHA staff as part of the Completeness Check, as well as the most common failures identified during these manual checks. During the webinar, you will receive advice on how to avoid these failures in order to prepare a registration dossier that can be successfully submitted. Here is the program for today. We will give an overview of the completeness check process, followed by an overview of the validation assistant and its importance of use when submitting a dossier to ECHA. We will then move on to the manual checks performed by ECHA at completeness check. And some examples will follow of the most common failures detected and how to avoid them. Before moving on to the Q&A session, we will look at the examples of frequent questions asked by registrants and what type of support ECHA can provide. This webinar will be recorded and published on our website. All the material we present today is available on the 2018 registration web pages, which you can find from our homepage. And without further delay, let's move on to the overview of the completeness check process, followed by the ECHA validation assistant, presented by my colleague Maria. Thank you.
My name is Maria, and I'm going to elaborate on the technical completeness check performed on the dossier submitted to ECHA. Before actually moving to describing the technical completeness check process, let us first have a brief overview at the overall submission process presented on this slide. This will help us identify at which stage the technical completeness check applies. As you can see, overall everything starts with uploading your EUCLID 6 dossier in REACH IT. After the dossier has entered into pipeline, it goes through pre-processing, which includes a number of IT checks, for instance, virus check or file format validation, among others. After pre-processing, the dossier further goes to the business rules check, where we make sure that the company submitted the correct type of dossier. Please note that only after passing the business rules check, your dossier is considered as submitted to ECHA, meaning that this would be the submission date of your dossier. Following business rules check, there are two parallel processes which apply, namely the financial completeness check, which includes the payment of the invoice, and the technical completeness check, which includes both automatic and manual checks performed by us. The result of both processes gives us an overall completeness check outcome, following which we will send you a decision in REACH IT. So now let us have a closer look at the technical completeness check process. The completeness check ensures that all the required information is present in the registration dossier as per Article 20 of REACH legislation and is performed on each registration regardless of whether it is an initial or an update submission. A little bit of the background on the completeness check. In 2010, ECHA incorporated the REACH requirements into automated rules. This gave us a possibility to further see how well these rules served their purpose, and as of 21st of June 2016, enhanced completeness check enters into force, which includes revised automated rules and additional manual checks performed by us. Because of these manual checks, the technical completeness check process might take a little bit longer than it used to. However, not longer than 3 weeks. But please be aware that if you submit your dossier 2 months before the registration deadline, then it might take up to 3 months after the registration deadline of 31st of May 2018 to get the technical completeness check outcome. So please be aware of this timeline. Another important thing to mention is that in case you are planning to update your registration and the previous dossier was submitted using Euclid 5, you might need to revise the data before submitting it in Euclid 6 format. So please reserve some time for this. Now moving forward, let us have a look at the possible outcomes at the technical completeness check level. Basically, there are two possible scenarios, positive and negative, which is pass and fail respectively. In case you fail the first TCC, then you might get one more possibility to submit your dossier within the same registration. And only after getting the outcome for the second technical completeness check, you will get the overall outcome for your submission dossier. Now let's discuss each of the outcomes in more detail. First, let's see what happens at the scenario when the positive outcome applies. When the technical completeness check passes for your dossier, you will receive a message in Reach IT. In case there was a payment involved at this step, and it is paid in a timely manner, then your submission is considered complete and a positive decision is sent to you via Reach IT. So what does this all mean to you as a company? Well, in case of initial submission, you will get the registration number assigned. In case of an update of existing registration, the updated information will be accepted into our database. Now moving forward to the scenario where the negative outcome applies. There are two possible scenarios. The first one is when you fail the technical completeness check for the first time. In this case, there will be a letter sent to your Reach IT task box, indicating which sections failed and how to correct them. In case of both initial submission and update of an existing registration, you will get only one possibility to submit a complete dossier within a deadline specified in the letter. The second scenario applies when you fail the technical completeness check for the second time. In that case, a negative decision will be sent in Reach IT task box informing that your submission is rejected. In case of initial submission, the registration number will not be granted. And if there was any fee involved, it will not be refunded. In case of an update registration, the updated information will not be accepted into our database and subsequent processes. However, you will be able to keep your registration number. And please be aware that only after rejection process is complete, you can submit a new dossier for the same substance. Now getting back to the first TCC failure, we mentioned that there is a letter sent to your Reach IT task box. You can find the letter under Key Documents as illustrated on this slide. We will now further discuss the TCC letter and its key components. Basically, the TCC letter is composed of three main information blocks. The first one, the main body, includes the deadline to correct failures and resubmit your dossier. The second block of information, or Annex 1, includes detailed information about incompleteness and instructions on how to correct the failures. The third block of information, Annex 2, includes instructions on creating updated dossier and validating it before submitting it in Reach IT. On this slide, you can see the screenshot of the main body of the letter, which includes the deadline for the resubmission and is bolded to be more easily spotted. Now you can see the Annex 1, where you can find detailed information of your failure. In the first paragraph, you can find the failing section name, followed by the failure description. It further contains the instructions on how to correct the failure, as well as includes reference to relevant support material. The bottom of Annex 1 also includes an indication when the failure cannot be detected by the validation assistant. Moving forward, you can see now the Annex 2 of the letter, which includes the instructions on how to submit a dossier in response to the technical completeness check letter, and a reminder to use the validation assistant. It is important to pay attention to the submission number and communication number indicated in this annex in order to avoid failing business rules when resubmitting your dossier. So to wrap up the main points of a TCC letter, first, you should carefully read the failure description in Annex 1 and make sure to follow the instructions on how to correct them. Further, you should make sure to correct all the failures listed in the letter before submitting an update of the dossier. Please make sure to correct only sections addressed in Annex 1 of the letter in order to avoid further triggering any other failures. And in case you have any questions or uncertainty about how to correct the failure, please use our contact form to address your question. And to conclude the technical completeness check presentation, we would like to indicate a number of take-home messages. First, technical completeness check is performed on both initial and update dossiers, and includes automatic and manual checks on your dossier. In case of the first failure, you receive a letter to your ECHA task box, which addresses the failures and instructions on how to correct them. At this point, please make sure to correct all the failures listed in the letter before submitting an update of your dossier. And in case of any questions or uncertainty on correcting the failures, please use our contact form. Now let's move on to the validation assistant. What is a validation assistant? It is a plugin available to the industry as a part of ECHA to support the registrants in preparing dossiers. It carries out validations on datasets and dossiers to verify that the information is provided as expected. The outcome of this validation is a report listing all the rules for which the validation has failed. Also, please be aware that there is a number of additional manual verifications done by us that are not displayed in the validation assistant. So when do we use the validation assistant plugin? We advise you to use it before you submit your dossier to minimize the risk for failures and rejection. An efficient way to do so is to check your substance dataset before your dossier is created, to correct any failures already at that point. Then it is also highly advised for you to check the final dossier before submitting it via ReachIT, because there are some checks that can be only shown checked on the dossier. Also, make sure to never submit your dossier if there are still any failures given by the validation assistant, because this would mean that your dossier will fail either at business rules check or completeness check levels. So now that we familiarized ourselves with the validation assistant plugin, let's now have a look to how it works in practice. First, you would need to access your substance dataset, right-click on it, and choose Validate. Further, you would need to fill in information that is requested by the tool in the next steps, which is very similar to the information that you would need to provide when creating your dossier. As a result, the validation report will be generated, as shown on this slide. The default view shows you the Submission Checks tab, where you can see the total number of submission check failures. and also a quality rules tab, which shows the number of quality check failures. So, how do we read the validation assistant report? The first column includes the failing rule ID. This is a very important piece of information because if you would like to contact us regarding a failure, then this would be the rule ID that you would need to quote in order for us to get back to you regarding the failure. Next two columns include the failing Euclid section number and name. This makes it easy to find the failure in Euclid. In the next column, you can see the name of the failing document. This is especially useful if you have many failures or many records in the same failure. Next column includes failure description, which addresses the nature of the failure and how to fix it. So make sure to read thoroughly, as it is a very important information in order for you to understand why you are failing and how to fix the failure. In order to easily navigate to the failing section or document, you should use either the open document at the top of this report, highlighted here, or by right-clicking in the actual failure and selecting after that open document as shown on this slide. Also, please be aware that you would not need to close the validation assistant report in order to be navigated to the failure location. Also, under section name, you can find additional information on how you can find the failure inside of the record. First of all, as illustrated in this example, you can find the name of the table in case the failure is found in a table. In this example, we have analytical determination table under analytical information record. 2 in parentheses means that the failure is located in the second row of this table. This is especially handy when you have several failures or several rows in one table. Now, after you made the necessary changes to the sections detected by the validation assistant, please always remember to use the Save button to save your changes. In case validation assistant is not visible, you can unhide it by clicking on the highlighted button in the second screenshot. This is located in the bottom of the Euclid user interface. And after that, you can click on the Recheck button in the Validation Assistant report so you can see if you amended your failures correctly. Please make sure to not submit the dossier before all submission failures are fixed. Also, it is highly advisable for you to correct the quality failures, which will help you improve your dossier in order to be considered for subsequent processes. So at this slide, you can also see how the validation assistant report should look with the 0 failures. You can also find here an indication that some of the failures cannot be detected by the validation assistant and are performed manually by us. Now let's have a look at how to run the Validation Assistant plugin in Euclid Cloud. First of all, you would need to access your substance in the Substance Dataset view. At the top right corner of the Dataset view, click on the Validate button. As a result, the Validation Assistant report is generated as presented on this slide. Compared to Euclid Desktop, the Cloud report has a simpler interface and also includes Submission Checks tab, where you can find the number of the submission check failures. Here you can also find the number of the completeness check failures. Under the Submissions tab, you can also find the name of the failing Euclid section, followed by the name of the failing document and the failure description. So, in order for you to easily navigate to the failing section, click on the name of the failing section to be taken to the failure location. After you have done all the necessary changes to the failing section, make sure to save your changes by clicking on the Save button in the bottom of the Euclid user interface. And after that, in order to go back to the validation report, click on the Validation Report button at the top of the Euclid user interface. So, to conclude the Validation Assistant report, we would like to point out several take-home messages. First, make sure to use the Validation Assistant to check if you give all expected information in your dossier. Make sure to correct all failures that appear in the Validation Assistant report. Please do not submit your dossier before all the failures are corrected. And please be aware that there is a number of additional checks the Validation Assistant cannot predict. And these checks will be further discussed and explained by my colleague Ella. At this point, I would like to thank you and hand the floor to Ella.
My name is Ella Laakkonen, and today I will tell you about manual checks and common failures in the completeness check. As of 21st of June 2016, automated completeness check was complemented with additional manual checks performed by us for certain elements of the dossier. These cannot be checked automatically. The manual failures cannot be displayed by the validation assistant either. The scope of manual checks is completeness, not quality nor compliance, and it is to ensure that registrants who deviate from standard requirements provide a justification that is foreseen in REACH regulation. The reason why we perform manual verification on the registration dossiers is to ensure a level playing field between the registrants who provide the standard information and the ones who deviate or waive. The current focus of manual checks are substance identification, inside which we check the UPAC name, composition, manufacturing process description of UVCP substances, analytical information, and deviations from standard rules. Then we check justifications for waiving of standard information requirements, which are studies on the physicochemical, environmental fate and hazard information, and the toxicological and ecotoxicological properties of the substance. And then for testing proposals, we verify that the registrant has considered alternative methods for testing on vertebrate animals. Lastly, if a chemical safety report is not present in the dossier, we check the justification for waiving this report. For more in-depth information on manual verifications, please refer to the document on information on manual verification at Completeness Check and the April 2017 webinar, both available via the following links. Then we proceed to the most common technical completeness check failures, and I will provide you tips how to avoid them. The areas that most commonly fail TCC, or the technical completeness check, are, not surprisingly, the same ones we focus our checks on, but registrants have more challenges with these sections inside the areas presented here. Then I will present some of the most common shortcomings with substance identification, data waivers, and chemical safety reports. First, we look into substance identification. For every substance that is registered, the UPAC name should always be provided in the UPAC name field under reference substance in EUCLID section 1.1. Note that this applies to UVCB substances as well. And by UVCB, we refer to substances of unknown or variable composition, of complex reaction products, or of biological materials. In case the UPAC nomenclature cannot be applied to your substance, as is often the case with UVCB substances, a chemical name, or the name that defines the chemical nature of your substance, should be provided in the UPAC name field. For information on how to name multi-constituent and UVCB substances, please consult the Q&A 1197 and Q&A 1196 available on the ECHA website and via these links. Also, an easy way to quickly find these entries is to use a search engine and, for example, type ECHA Q&A 1197, and usually the first hit you get is the one you are looking for. Then here we have a screenshot of EUCLID section 1.1, where you should provide the UPAC name for your substance. By clicking the arrow icon, you can edit your reference substance, including the UPAC name field. Then we move on to constituents. First, I want to draw your attention to mono and multi-constituent substances. For a monoconstituent substance, the main constituent is expected to be present in each reported composition at a minimum of 80%, and impurities are expected to be present in each reported composition at a maximum of 20%. Whereas for a multi-constituent substance, the main constituents are expected to be present in each reported composition at a maximum of 80%. And impurities are expected to be present in each reported composition at a maximum of 10%. Then, if your registered substance deviates from these rules, a scientifically substantiated justification is needed in the Justification for Deviations field in EUCLID section 1.2. And shortly I will show you where to find this field with the help of an EUCLID screenshot. Onwards with the constituents. Now we look at the section that often fails, the composition of a UVCB substance. Also, for a UVCB substance, constituents should be provided. The constituents for each reported composition of a UVCB substance should be provided in EUCLID section 1.2 under Constituents. All individual constituents present at more than 10% or relevant for classification and labeling and or persistent bioaccumulative and toxic assessment should be reported separately. Other constituents should be identified as far as possible, as separate constituents or as groups of generic constituents. UVCB substances are not considered to contain impurities. All constituents should be reported under the Constituents heading. In exceptional cases, if not possible to report any constituents separately, provide a scientifically fully substantiated justification under Justification for Deviations field in EUCLID. Now we move on to the manufacturing process description of a UVCB substance, which I will call MPD for short and clarification. The manufacturing process description for UVCP is always required in addition to the chemical name and chemical composition. You can provide your MPD in the field description in EUCLID section 1.2. You can type your MPD as a free text, or you can make use of the template, which is marked with an A icon, to help you report all the relevant information. Please remember to fill in relevant data for your substance. Inserting the template alone will not be considered complete. For more information, refer to Q&As 1199 and Q&A 1316 to 1320. Here we have a screenshot of EUCLID section 1.2, where you have all the relevant fields when reporting your manufacturing process description for your UVCP substances, or when you deviate from the standard rules for composition concerning mono, multi, and UVCP substances. And you have to insert a justification for this. You should declare your MPD in the field description, as highlighted here in the screenshot. We recommend that you use the template which you find when you click the A icon. After this, a pop-up window will appear, and for the manufacturing process description, you select the option 2, and by clicking Insert, the template will load into the free text field. When you use the template, remember to also fill it with your relevant information, because inserting the template alone will not be considered complete by ECHA. Then, for inserting a justification when deviating from the standard rules for composition of mono and multi-constituent and UVCP substances, you should use the justification for deviations field, also highlighted here in the screenshot. Then, the final part of substance identification is the analytical information. For your dossier to be considered complete in terms of the analytical information, the required analytical reports for identification and quantification should be attached in EUCLID section 1.4. In this screenshot from EUCLID section 1.4, you see the table where you should insert the methods and results of your analysis. For reporting the analytical information, you should always complete the rows so that you select a value for purpose of analysis, analysis type, type of information, and attach methods/results. You should fill in the rows as shown here in the example. That is, when you report analytical information, the 4 first fields should be filled in. Also note that the required analytical reports can be inserted as separate entries or as one entry, as shown here in the example. In very exceptional cases, when quantification is not scientifically relevant or possible, instead of an attachment, a scientifically fully substantiated justification should be given. After you submit your dossier, we check the justification manually. So, if you do not report quantification, then you should select a rationale for no results and provide a justification that is relevant to your case in the field justification in EUCLID. Then we move on to data waiving. There are 3 options available to fulfill the REACH information requirements under Annex 7 and 8. First, you can provide the standard required study, or you can provide an adaptation according to Section 1 of REACH Annex 11, which are use of existing data, weight of evidence, QSAR, in vitro methods, and grouping of substances and read across. If you utilize one of the above options, Please provide the relevant study results marked as a key study or weight of evidence in the endpoint study record you create in Euclid. Then lastly, you can provide a data waiving in accordance with column 2 of REACH Annexes 7 and 8 or Annex 11, sections 2 and 3. Here I will show you how to insert your data waiving justification into the correct fields, since it is very common that a submission will fail if the information is somewhere it should not be. First and foremost, you should enter the justification in the field Justification for Data Waiving, highlighted here in the Euclid screenshot. When clicking the red downward pointing arrow, a pop-up window will appear and you can either see if some of the pick list values apply to your case, and if not, choose Other and provide a scientifically substantiated justification in line with the appropriate REACH annex. You can also use the Remarks field for additional information. If you wish to further explain your case, you can use the fields Justification for Type of Information and Attached Justification. Do remember that if you use these additional fields, the main argumentation for justification has to be in the Justification for Data Waiving field. Then I will show you examples of incomplete and complete justifications for data waiving. First, for Euclid section 4.5, granulometry, or the particle size distribution in other words, an incomplete justification would state that, according to Annex 11.2, testing is not needed, while a complete one would state, according to REACH Annex 7, Section 7.14, Column 2, the test is not needed because the substance is marketed or used in a non-solid or non-granular form. Then for adsorption/desorption, incomplete one would be, it is technically not possible to perform the test because the test substance is a UVCP, whereas a complete one would be, the test is not needed since the substance and its relevant degradation products decompose rapidly. Two more examples here. For toxicity to microorganisms, in the first justification, the registrant states, test not needed based on results from the test on soil microorganisms. And this would be considered incomplete. And complete one would be, there is no emission to a sewage treatment plant. The last example concerning toxicity to reproduction, an incomplete one would state, study is ongoing, whereas a complete one would state, a prenatal developmental toxicity study is available. Please note that the justification study ongoing is never considered complete for waiving data in any of the other sections either. So, what is common for all these failing justifications is that they are not backed up by REACH regulation. It is not enough to only make a statement describing your situation or referring to experience or opinions, but the justification should be scientifically fully substantiated and also in line with REACH. Then lastly, I mention the Chemical Safety Report, or CSR for short. A chemical safety report should be provided for substances manufactured or imported at greater than 10 tons per year, or a justification why it is not required should be included. If a chemical safety report is not attached, a justification why it is not required should be included in section 13.1 under field Further Information on the CSR Attached /Remarks, or the field Discussion. For member registrants, if the lead registrant has provided the chemical safety report on your behalf, You should indicate this in the dossier header under Information provided by the lead registrant on behalf of the members. So to repeat, if you are a member of a joint submission and the lead has provided the CSR for you, remember to tick the box when you create your dossier, as indicated here in the screenshot. And now I will wrap up my presentation with a couple of take-home messages. Remember to follow the manual How to Prepare Registration and P-Board Dossiers, which is integrated in the help system of ECHA and also available via this link. Please insert information into the correct ECHA fields. Also, make use of the provided templates whenever possible and include relevant scientific justifications. Please remember that justification should be based on REACH regulation. For more information on manual completeness check, please refer to the document with information on manual checks available on the ECHA website under Support and Manuals or via this link directly. That is all for me. I thank you for your attention, and now I will hand over the stage to my colleague Laura Lee.
Hello everyone, I'm Laura Lee and I'll be talking to you about common cases and also the support which ECHA offers to our customers and companies. I have 4 cases which I'm going to talk about. The first one is about the second TCC failure, and the question here is, I failed technical completeness check for the second time. What are the consequences? My next case, this case number 2, is about nons. And the question there is, my previous submission was a dossier for notified new substances, which is the nons, with no tonnage band upgrade. Now I will become a lead of a joint submission at the same tonnage band. Can I still rely on the nons derogation? My case number 3 is about uses, and the question there is, I am uncertain how my substance is used. Where can I find help? And then the case number 4 is about the director's contact group. And there the question is, my tests were ordered before the end of March, but I have not received the results in time to complete my dossier in time before the registration deadline. Now what can I do? Let's start with the case number 1, which is about the second TCC failure. And the first slide here, I have the initial submission, which fails for the second time. And the second failure always leads to the rejection of the submission. Now, in this case, no registration number will be assigned to your substance, and also no related fees will be refunded. Now, the new submission process can only begin after the rejection process has been finalized by us. The second case which I have is an update of an existing registration, which fails for the second time. And the same here as with the initial submission, the second failure leads to the rejection of the submission. And in this case, no new information will be accepted. But however, you do keep your registration number, which you have already received with your initial submission. And the new submission process can only begin after the rejection process has been finalized by us. And the rejection process can take up to several weeks to be finalized. Let's move on to our case number 2, which was about the nons. And the question was, my previous submission was a dossier with nons with no tonnage band update. And now I will become a lead of a joint submission at the same tonnage band. Can I still rely on the nons derogation? Now, nons is a notified new substance, and they were notified under the previous directive. However, the nons substances are considered registered under REACH. Now, a limited completeness check applies when nons registration is updated without any change to the information requirement. Now, when becoming a lead of a joint submission, a full completeness check is applied, as the dossier is now the reference point for the whole joint submission. And this means the nonce derogation is no longer valid. And then this means that the submitted dossier needs to pass the enhanced completeness check, including all the manual checks. So to answer the question, can I rely on the nonce derogation in this case when becoming a lead? You cannot. The case number 3 is about the uses. Our guidance of the use descriptions explains the key elements needed to be reported in EUCLID. The use maps were developed by industry sectors, for example, detergents, inks, or cosmetics, and they give the agreed ways of describing the uses for a range of common products. Now, if the industry sector covers the product your substance is in, you are able to benefit from the use maps. The aim here is to support registrants in preparing their chemical safety assessment. And the use maps can also be used after the 2018 registration deadline to update the registration dossier and exposure scenarios. The use maps library, they give an overview of the industry sectors who then have developed the use maps and a direct access to their use maps files. And the use maps library, they help you to find the use descriptions for a typical products and associated conditions of use. And it gives a realistic basis for your chemical safety assessment. And the use maps library, they include the use descriptions for workers, consumers, and also the environment exposure assessments. In relation to the uses, we also wanted to mention the KESAR tool, which was generated by ECHA. And this tool supports you in a few different ways. It reports you in reporting the uses of your substance. It also helps you to carry out your chemical safety assessment. And it helps you to generate your chemical safety report and the exposure scenarios for communicating conditions of safe use. Now we can move to our case number 4, which is about the Directors Contact Group, DCG, as in short. And in this case, the question which I have is, my tests were ordered before the end of March 2018, but I have not received the results in time to complete my dossier in time before the registration deadline. Now, what can I do? Now, ECHA has reactivated the Directors Contact Group, or DCG, for the 2018 reached registration deadline for 4 separate solutions. And this case, number 4, which I am going to talk about now, it falls under the Directors Contact Group issue number 10.3, Completeness of Registration Dossiers. And in this scenario, the data required in Annexes 7 and 8 of REACH is not yet available by the registration deadline. Now, if this is your case and you have ordered your tests before the end of March 2018 and you have all the needed documents to prove so, then you are eligible for this scenario. However, to continue an uninterrupted manufacture or import of your substance, we recommend you to submit your registration by the registration deadline, the 31st of May 2018. However, there are several steps you need to take before you submit. Firstly, contact us via the contact form, which is found on the ECHA website. You select the option Regulatory Obligation from the drop-down menu. And you have to explain your situation clearly and make a reference to the specific scenario of your case. In my case here, the scenario would be an issue 10.3. Then you will receive an acknowledgement of your request. And this email contains more information on the required documentation and also a deadline which is given to you to submit all the needed paperwork. Then once you have submitted all the documents, we will assess whether your case can be considered as a valid DCG case. If your DCG case is considered valid, you will receive instructions by email on submitting your registration. This submission will fail on the first completeness check, and you will get a reasonable deadline to resubmit, taking into account the time which is needed for you to receive the lab results. Now, the DCG case can be considered invalid in a few scenarios, and these are, for example, if we have not received the documentations on time by the deadline which is given to you, if some of the documentations are missing or they are not considered valid. Now, if this is the case, then your submission will follow the regular completeness check process and the timelines. A note to take here is that because of the processing time at the completeness check, and to avoid any constraints, you are advised to prepare your DCG case well in advance. To find more information on the Directors Contact Group or DCG, you can go to ECHA website and you can write down Directors Contact Group or DCG to the search button on the top of the page. And you will get more information, and also you will get more information on all the 4 scenarios which are covered in the 2018 registration deadline. In any case, before you decide to contact us, make sure to check the DCG page and to confirm if this is a possible option for you. And also a note to take is that the DCG request will be accepted only 1 week before the registration deadline. Now I will move on to the support which ECHA offers to the companies. Firstly, I would like to point out the registration manual, which you are able to find from the ECHA website. If you click the support button on the top right corner and then to the lower corner on the left, you find the manual. And if you press this link, you are able to find the registration manual and also the information on manual verification and completeness check. And both of these manuals are available in several EU languages in case English is not your strongest language. We also have the same registration manual available in EUCLID 6, and you can access it by pressing the F1 button or using the help button on the top of the EUCLID 6 interface. Then I wanted to mention the EUCLID webinars which we have available. The latest one was done just by the end of last year, so it's only a few months old. And I wanted to mention in this case the EUCLID Cloud, which you can access from the ECHA website as seen on the screenshot. And the EUCLID Cloud has integrated and guided support to help you with your registration. As my colleagues have mentioned before, I wanted to point out to use the Validation Assistant and run the Validation Assistant on your substance dataset and on your dossier before and after creating it. And always please use the latest version of the EUCLID. Now, in case of the technical completeness check failure, you will receive a new task in your Reach IT. Now, tasks, they require an action within a specific time frame. Within the task item, you will find information related to this specific failure and a direct link to the TCC letter, and also the necessary information to successfully resubmit your dossier. To keep track on your submissions, you could receive a daily notification emails, and we do advise you to assign a relevant email address under the email notification settings. You may contact ECHA by using the contact form if you have any further questions. You can find a link to the contact form from the ECHA website on the top right corner where it says contact next to the search field. By pressing this one, you can choose the topics which your question relates to. So in this case, it is a reach. And then on the pop-up, you can specify your question. Now we're using the contact form in order for us to assist you promptly we do advise you to include all the relevant information which then ECHA would need to be able to answer your question as accurately and as quickly as possible. This information is, for example, the submission number you refer to or you have question to, or an ECHA decision number. If you have questions on specific failure, then remember to mention this one as well. The average time to receive a reply from ECHA is about 7 days. Of course, this depends on the case and the complexity of your question. Wanted to mention in regards to additional support, to please make sure that the contact person of the submission is the right person who is aware of the particular submission, and also that the contact details of this person are accurate and they are up to date. So the email and phone number are contact details where ECHA can reach the person. As we may contact this particular person, and we contact the person by phone, and we normally make the phone calls to remind of the technical completeness check if the deadline is approaching. And also we do assist with very complex failures. And if ECHA contacts you, we do always send a summary email after the phone call to wrap up the information that we talked about. Now, we are here to help you. It is our common goal that you are able to successfully resubmit your registration before the deadline. Just a summary, the available support what we have. Please, you can use the registration manual, which is in ECHA website and also in ECHA. And you have the document on the manual verification. And please remember to use the validation assistant. And in case of a TCC failure, kindly carefully read the letter which is sent to you. And if you have any further questions, you're always more than welcome to use the contact form. So this is my part of this webinar, and best of luck for your registration for 2018 deadline. I will give this floor now to my colleague Sandra, and she will wrap up the webinar. Thank you.
And now to conclude today's webinar, I will leave you with some final take-home messages. The technical completeness check, including the manual checks performed by our staff, is in general performed on each dossier within 3 weeks of its submission date. However, for dossiers submitted in the course of the 2-month period immediately before the registration deadline, the completeness check may take up to 3 months after the deadline. So registrants who wish to have the outcome of the completeness check in advance of the 2018 registration deadline may want to take into account these timelines. We would like to remind you to use the validation assistant tool before submitting your dossier to ECHA. Never submit the dossier with submission checks, failures reported. This would avoid, of course, technical completeness check failures or business rule failures. And as mentioned during the webinar, there are manual checks performed on your dossier by ECHA staff, which cannot be displayed by the validation assistant. Check our document on manual verification for a description of those checks. And remember to monitor in ReachIT your tasks and messages regularly. This will help you to have quick action on any task that you might by chance receive in ReachIT. And if you need help, you can contact us via our web form. And as a reminder, if it's related to a specific submission, please include the submission number in your contact and the area of difficulty so we can provide you support in a prompt manner. And our panelists will continue to reply to the received questions. During the next 15 minutes, you can still submit your questions to us. If any of your questions is not answered to today, you can still contact your national help desk, or you can send them to us using our contact form. And we hope you enjoyed today's webinar and found it useful. Thank you for participating.